Hello.
Welcome back to another episode of Historia.
I'm Kylie.
And I'm Jamie.
And we are here to talk more about
Ancient Egypt, Mr. Tutankhamun himself.
Yes, part 2.
Part 2.
So if you have not listened to part 1, go do that because y'all like to listen to part 2 before you listen to part 1 because we always have more downloads on the second parts and it doesn't make any sense. So listen to part 1.
Tell us how you really feel.
I've noticed it. It's every single time we do like a series.
Really?
People will listen to the last one or like the second one.
I mean, I'm kind of like the same way when it comes to like reading books.
I want to know the ending. Yeah.
I do. And honestly, I'm really bad. So if I'll watch a movie that's based off like a book, I will read the synopsis of the book, especially if it's a series and there's only one movie out. I will read the whole synopsis of the whole book series so I know what happens.
Okay.
I'm really like I did that for because Crazy Rich Asians came out.
Yeah.
And it's a book series. And so I was like, okay, I got to know what happens. So, and I did that too with oh God.
Didn't you do it to, was it The Summer I Turned Pretty?
Yeah, I did that for The Summer I Turned Pretty. I know who she gets with.
I haven't even watched it.
It's pretty good. Second season, people were like, oh my God, like, man. I was like, she's a teenager. What'd you expect? They make dumbass decisions. I know I did.
Well, technically, if they want to know the ending, they should listen to part 1 because we're kind of going like back in time, sort of.
Oh, yeah. In this case, yeah, you might want to go back to part 1 because I talked about Howard Carter and how he discovered Tutankhamun. So
yeah, and
today,
this is just all about him.
Yeah, this is his backstory. This is his origin story.
The answers we've been waiting for. So let's jump on in.
Let's do it.
Let's dig on in.
Let's dig on. Oh, God.
We've been digging a lot lately.
Oh, all right. Let's get started. So, as last week, I watched 2 of the documentaries on Disney Plus, Tut in Color, and then I watched King Tut: Hidden Secrets. Tut in Color is just like a 45-minute. The series, The Hidden Secrets, is about a 3-episode series, about 45 minutes long each, and then the Telby Wilkinson book, The Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt, and then the encyclopedia. Well, God, what was her name? I just want to make sure. I don't want to leave her out.
Scroll all the way up, back up.
Helen Strudwick. There we go.
Can't leave Helen out.
No, it said, you spelled her name wrong. And I'm like, sure I did. It's like my first round of notes. I never check my spelling. So if I'm pausing, it should be because of my spelling. All right. So after his discovery, Howard Carter, he was the guy who led the expedition to find Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So after his discovery, Egyptologists and archaeologists for the next decade have spent their careers I wouldn't say the next decade, the next century, the last 100 years, have spent their careers to understand more of who this pharaoh was, so Tutankhamun, and why there is so little of him mentioned. And man, there is a lot of tea.
Ooh.
Yeah. So the more that we find about him, we're just like, oh shit, this guy got the shit end of the stick.
Aw.
Between the life of Tutankhamun and his death, I'm going to speak a lot of assumptions. It's really hard for ancient history to really get specific proof, like 100%. And because there is so not as much of him written down in like the temples and like writing or anything, we can pretty much go from like his grave goods. We're taking assumptions through that and through like the DNA of him and others to kind of put things together, like puzzle pieces, like try and put things together in that sense. So a lot of what I can go off of is not 100% confirmed, but a lot of it is like assumptions and higher probabilities of being confirmed. Okay. So it's not like 100%, but some of the things we can pretty much confirm. So
yeah, just take it with a grain of salt.
Literally. So now we're going to start from the beginning. So let's talk about Tut's daddy, Akhenaten.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, wait. Didn't we talk about him?
You talked about Nefertiti.
Yeah.
And you added some stuff about Akhenaten because that was his queen wife.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, that was so long ago when we did that.
Yeah. So
I was like, I know the name, heard the name.
If you want to know a little bit more about Nefertiti and Akhenaten, you can listen to the Queens of Egypt episode. Forewarning, we do sound like we're underwater, and it was a long time ago, so I rambled a lot.
Yeah, episode 4 or something?
Something like that. 5 or 6 maybe.
It's like a 1-digit number.
Yeah, it was way back when. I would like to rehash.
Yeah. We're eventually going to redo all the underwater episodes slowly.
Yeah. We started with
Titanic,
so we'll make our way back.
Yeah, because we got to redo our Disney one. That one is so long. It was like 2.5 hours.
Oh, I know. God.
If you listen to that, you're true.
I don't even have my notes on that anymore because Remy chewed up my notebook. Yeah.
Well, we could just redo the whole thing, I guess, one day. Anyway.
Okay, so yeah, we're going to start with Tut's daddy, Akhenaten.
Okay.
A handful. So that's right. He's just, he was the pharaoh right before Tut, and he had quite a reign. He was very refreshing. So Akhenaten was a pharaoh who was originally named Amenhotep IV, but when he came into reign, he decided to make big changes. He decided to remove all religion worship except to worship the Aten. So the Aten was depicted as a sun disk in Egyptian art and was a popular belief during the New Kingdom era. Akhenaten just took it a step further. He took this belief very seriously and eventually moved the capital to the middle of the desert in the middle of nowhere in Egypt and made it Amarna.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. He is a whole topic in himself. This dude is fucking wild. Anyway, he would go on to have children, one of them being Tutankhamun. He was not a son of Nefertiti because they only had daughters. Okay, and a woman could not be a pharaoh at this point. So he had, with like another wife or like his side piece, he had Tutankhamun, so he would become the next pharaoh. So from my math, he was born in 1345 BCE. He would grow up in Amarna, from what we can assume, because of Akhenaten. And being the first son, he would be the next heir to the throne. Now, tragedy would come as Akhenaten would die in 1336 BCE, making the young 9-year-old the next pharaoh.
What?
Yeah.
9?
9. And of course, at this point, he had to have like a co-regent, but he was getting pretty close to the age of being an adult enough to be a pharaoh on his own.
How many years did they live? Like 20?
I mean, the rough age was about like 40 or 50.
Okay.
But in this case, incest was strong.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. So a lot of responsibility would immediately fall onto the newly appointed pharaoh. At the time, his name was Tutankhaten. So it's not Tutankhamun.
He's tooting all the time.
Aten, as the worship of the Aten was still enforced. So he was really big into that. He would be inherited a failing kingdom at this point because Akhenaten was terrible at ruling and pretty much put Egypt in the gutter at this point because he didn't really want to do like any fighting or any war. He kind of kept to like inside and kind of did his own thing by like building the new capital and wanting to make himself like super well known and for the Aten to be like the big thing. And so this really, there was no outside trading. And so this caused a huge like failing of the kingdom because they couldn't get anything. Nothing was being imported. Nothing was being exported really. So it was poor poor Tut. He just inherited a shit show.
Aw.
Yeah. So to legit his succession, Tut would go on to marry his sister, Paten, at this time. So I'm assuming he had help from a co-regent, and it was during his second year on the throne that Tut decided to eliminate the worship of the Aten and to resort back to the Amun. So that's where he changed his name to Tutankhamun, and his wife would change hers to, I think it's like Ankhesenamun.
Agacinnamon.
Ankhesenamun.
Oh,
God. I hate myself.
Should have used the little thing that shows you. Agacinnamon.
Oh, my God. So from here on, there is not much to go off until the discovery of his tomb. So that's pretty much like, because there's more known on Akhenaten because we still have a lot of his statues and a lot of his propaganda and his campaigning and stuff. Like, we still have quite a bit of that, even though they tried to remove it. It's still there. But with Tutankhamun, there wasn't much to go off of from that. So from what we know is that Tut had reigned for 8 years until his death at the age of 19 in 1327.
19, wow.
Yeah, he was only 19 years old.
Wow.
It was unexpected, and the next to take throne was his successor, since Tut had no heirs himself.
Oh.
Yeah. Only lasted a few years before dying himself and the throne going to Horemheb. But even though Tut only reigned for 9 years, there was still a faint mark of him still residing. Pharaohs, when they take the throne, from day one, they start to make their mark on their significance to Egypt as well as their tomb. Literally, as soon as they start to reign, they start building their tomb for when they die.
Yeah.
Their significance could be from the pyramids or like the Sphinx in like the Old Kingdom. And this was even, as I explained last week, this is the walls on the temples. They wrote their propaganda, their campaigns, and just pretty much a lot of them also kind of their representation of how they saw themselves as gods. And so there was a lot of that, especially in obelisks, but Tut didn't really have that. He was never added to the later kings lists that have been discovered for several reasons. For one, his reign was short, as he only reigned for about 10 years, and he started when he was 9. So not much could he do as a 9-year-old. And there was not so much of him that we have of him to like his impact on Egypt that we have significant proof to. Like, there was no proper, like there was, I think, one visual of him on his chariot and fighting the enemy on, I think it was in Luxor. So it is very much also that he wasn't added to the king's list because he didn't have an heir, which was a big no-no. So his dynasty could not continue on because he had no children. Even if it was a female, he could have gotten someone to take the throne so his line would continue on, but he legit had no one.
It's only 19.
Exactly. Now, it has been confirmed that Tut did try to have children with his sister.
Oh, okay.
As there were 2 stillborn mummies in his tomb that were of his daughters.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they did some like DNA research on the because at first they thought that it could have been just like a sacrifice. Yeah. But then they did some DNA compared to him, and they realized this was his daughters.
Wow.
That were stillborn. Yeah. So they mummified them.
Aww.
And so he did try to have children, but none of them lived.
He didn't have enough time.
It was that, but also incest was always a key part of the royal life in Egypt.
Yeah.
And with his family's dynasty strong with it, he unfortunately was the product of the price of incest as well as his children. Yeah, Tut was not like an average individual. So due to the lineage of incest within the family tree, he had a club foot that would affect his walking throughout his entire life.
Oh.
Like in his tomb, they found canes that he would walk with.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it had like the bottom, like a lot of them on the bottom were like roughed out.
Yeah.
Because he would walk on them and use them all the time. So many believed that with him being a young pharaoh and with his birth defects, that he was just a boy king. And that's what a lot of people call him. They call him Tutankhamun, the boy king.
Uh-huh.
But he wasn't just some boy king. For one, the age to become pharaoh in ancient Egypt was about 14 or 15. So he was a good part of his range, like his age and his reign, he was an adult. So, because like you see with a lot of cultures, you become a man when you're around like 13, 14 years old.
Yeah.
Ancient Egypt was the same.
Uh-huh.
So technically he was not a boy king. In our eyes now he was.
Right.
But in their
time.
eyes, no, he was a perfectly well-established pharaoh for his time. But it was just cut short. So it was also, it has also been researched through his artifacts on his part, like as a pharaoh, for why not only was he not a boy king, but possibly that he was also a warrior. Because a lot of people, when they think of like, oh, you have a disability, you're not going to be able to do much, especially with like a club foot.
Yeah.
He, on the other hand, of what they're finding in their research and on all of his artifacts, it didn't look so much as like propaganda that they're finding. They're like, this actually looks pretty legit, of like he's campaigning of what he's going to do, that he is going to go to war. He was, and as a pharaoh, like he probably was like, okay, I have this disability, but I also have this dedication to be a pharaoh and to make my country stronger. And I feel like too, this is just my thought, is that his dad fucked up so much that he wanted to prove to his people and to himself that he would not end up like his father.
Yeah.
That he wanted to give his people the hope of, hey, we are still strong. We can still fight our enemies. We can still trade. We can still be good, in that I am not my father who is going to force you to follow one God and to stop what we're doing that made us great in the first place. And so he was trying to do better, but his time just was cut short to really prove himself of that, which is really sad because he had determination. It just sucks that with so much incest and just, he just got the shit end of the stick when it came to it. Because in one of the shows I was watching, it was showing like a proper like family tree, and how like when you're with a significant other, it has like the different grandparents and the different parents. And then you look at the family tree of like Tutankhamen's, and it's literally just straight up of like, because his grandparents married each other, and then his parents married each other. And then it was just like a full thing of lineage.
Holy shit.
Yeah, it was a whole thing. It was wild.
Wow.
Yeah. So on his, it's actually, we find too that he was a warrior, was on that first chest that we found, that they found last week, that we discussed in that first room, that on this chest, he was on his chariot fighting off an enemy. Like he had his bow and arrow in hand, and he was rolling over some enemies on his chariot. Like it literally had them like, ah. Yeah. So, and it could have been at the time that who he was fighting was the Hittites, which were really big enemies at the time for them. And there were also, in the tomb itself, there were several decorated bows and hundreds of arrows. So this was like another kind of help push in that direction of like, okay, he actually was using these for something.
Yeah.
That he was not just sitting around playing pharaoh, that he was actually proving himself to be put out there. And I think with a lot of pharaohs, they don't actually go out and fight these wars themselves. But I think with him trying to get that bond together with his people and his army, that he may have just gone out to fight these wars too, to prove to be like, I'm on your side.
Yeah.
And I'm going to help you guys protect our country, our kingdom. So that's just an assumption. Who knows? So on his person, we also find that Tut was wearing or had a battle armor that was made out of leather that was molded. So all of the little pieces, it was like a giant dress thing. And on like the skirt, it had like little flaps that were pressed together that were all molded. So they looked exactly the same. And it would help with how they overlapped one another. It helped when an arrow would go flying at them that it wouldn't go straight through the leather.
Okay.
Yeah, because they were overlapped. And because they found that the pieces were molded, that it could be another sign that this was actual battle armor and not just for decoration or for show, that he was actually intending to use it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like little things that we're finding out within the last like 20 years or so of this king. Yeah. So it was pretty wild. So a few depictions have also been found in the Temple of Luxor of Tut in a battle that reflected, as I said earlier, of more of a campaign than propaganda, because propaganda was a lot to really help excite people to be like, we can beat them, we can destroy them, we could do best. Meh. So there is no written proof that that he ever went to war, but it was around his death that I believe the army of like Egypt was fighting in like northern Syria area. So he could have been there fighting too.
Yeah.
So it's just an assumption. We don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it does kind of lean in that direction that, he was fighting during the time of his death. But there's also x-rays and further examination of the mummy of Tut that has led archaeologists to believe not only how he died, but where he was at the time of death. Again, it's assumptions. We don't know exactly because there's no written proof of it. So from the mummification process on Tut, it was evident that it was not done by an expert. So yeah, they had like complete experts of mummification. Like they had people whose specific jobs were to properly wrap and mummify the remains of pharaohs.
So how come they didn't have a proper one for him?
He could have been away and they didn't have an expert.
Oh my God.
So that could be like another idea of like, maybe he was fighting during the time of his death.
Wow.
So an excerpt. So this was actually really interesting when I was watching the documentary. I think it was the final episode of The Hidden Treasures. And they were talking about how like the whole mummification process and how an expert, when they would take out all of like their internal organs, because that was something that they did in the mummification process. So they didn't like bloat up and like explode, but they also used it for like religious like reasons. They would put like an incision on the side of like the hip, kind of lower torso area. And that's how they would like, the person would then stick their hand in and take out all the, like the organs.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But for Tut, his was botched and was cut in the lower torso area, like right across the torso, like the stomach. And that's how they took out all of the organs, including his heart. Oh. He did not have a heart. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that in ancient Egypt during the mummification process is that the heart was always kept. Now, they believed that the heart was your knowledge.
Yeah.
They didn't believe the brain was.
Fair.
Yeah. So they believe the heart was pretty much, it held your emotions, it held your knowledge, it held everything. And you wanted to take that into your afterlife because, of course, it had to be weighed with the feather. And so if you don't have the heart, then you were going to kind of wander aimlessly for the rest of your life in the afterlife of having no emotion and not getting to that paradise. Oh. So with Tut, he didn't have his heart when they did the x-ray of the mummification. They're like, wait, what? Because that should have been done by an expert to know to keep the heart. But as another one I was seeing, he mentioned when he was going through the x-rays, he was like, depending on how he died, there may have not been a heart to keep and
Yeah.
to keep there. Like, who knows? So that was completely botched. And then they found as well, when they were doing the x-rays and the examination, that they put, they normally take out the brain.
Yeah.
And they put like a resin in it to keep that shape and that form and everything of like the skull and whatnot. And he had 2 different resins in there. So it could have been, they did the first resin first, and then later on they came back with the second.
Oh.
Because they saw kind of like a split. And so whoever did this mummification did a botched job on it.
Yeah.
It was not good.
What the hell?
Because
That's crazy.
Yeah, and they actually, showed his mummification and how it looks compared to like his grandfather's. His grandfather's is like super well done, and he looks so like lifelike almost. And then you look at Tut and he just looks terrible. Like he just has all this resin goop, like he looks completely black because they just put so much on him. Yeah, he is not in good condition.
That's so sad.
Yeah, so they did. Poor guy. He can't catch a break.
Even in the afterlife.
Literally in the afterlife, he can't.
Poor guy.
I know. Oh, man. So another weird thing is that they came to find during the x-rays is that Tut's ribs were broken. Yeah.
Interesting.
This had back the idea that Tut could have been fighting off somewhere far from the Nile during this time and could have been hit by something abrupt and hard on contact. Maybe that of a chariot.
Oh.
So he could have been fighting and 2 chariots. He was just doing his pole thing. He might have been in the back, like the way back, because you're not going to put your leader in the front. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And maybe someone came up and sideswiped him. And he hit it, and then he died from that impact.
Okay.
So that could have been. We will never know, but that is like a pretty good assumption that that they're coming up with. So more has been discovered on Tut in his reign that are always blowing the minds of archaeologists. So his treasures from his tomb have since been exhibited in a $1 billion museum in Cairo, with all 5,000 and some of his objects that have been found.
Jeez.
And they, in this like whole new like museum, they planned, I think it's now a like a established thing. They wanted to put all of his items on exhibition.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of items.
5,000.
Yeah, and they took a huge chunk of time to make sure everything was prepped and ready.
Oh my God.
So they were doing all of these analyzing and examinations on all of these objects to find more things about it. And that's why they made these documentaries to really help kind of put him back out there and kind of like more of the mysteries and stuff about him and kind of them finding kind of answers to him almost. Or kind of just having more questions now, I guess. So this is where the tea comes in. So in what they found is that these 5,000 objects that have been stowed away in the basement, they could not believe that there was so much, but because his tomb was so small, they were like, how much treasure could have been in a bigger tomb? Like, he should have been in a bigger tomb, even though he only reigned for about 10 years.
Yeah.
They believed that his original tomb was what was now Ai's. So so they probably started on the tomb that Ai was buried in.
Okay.
But they didn't finish it when Tut died. So I was like, let's put him in a different one, and this one will be mine. Even though I didn't even reign like 5 years, and he got the bigger tomb.
Yeah, that sounds like
Yeah.
that sounds pretty possible then.
Yeah. So I was like his backup man. But when Tut died, he was like, we have to finish this. We have to make sure he gets his burial, but like he's not going to get this tomb. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be mine. So archaeologists have found in Ai's tomb that it was 2 times bigger than the size of Tutankhamun's. So it was 2 times smaller, which is interesting. They're like, okay, that's weird. That whose tomb was it is supposed to be then? Who was Tutankhamun's tomb originally supposed to be for?
Yeah.
And they're still trying to figure it out. They might think that, oh, it could possibly be like Nefertiti's, or maybe another like high official or someone that could have been their tomb. But of course, Tut died, and they're like, we got to fill him somewhere. And so they decided this. Or maybe I had something to do with it. I don't know.
Wow, the mystery.
So they are thinking too, like I watched in one of, I think it was a TV series. It was like Lost Treasures of Egypt, that this tomb could have very well been made for a queen instead of a king, because of the direction of where the tomb was, of where he was, where like the coffin was. Because normally I believe to the left is where the kings should be, where the pharaohs, and to the right should be where the queens are. And his was to the right.
Oh.
Yeah. So it could very much well be that it was meant for a queen instead of him.
That would make sense.
Yeah. And the size, because a queen's not going to have as big of a tomb as a pharaoh.
Okay, I think that has to be it.
So Tut's mysterious life before and after death have led many archaeologists to really set in their effort to understand him better through his grave goods, and so far have been pretty successful at it. So one grave good that I have to mention that was on Hidden Secrets was the dagger that he had on him when they found his mummy.
Oh.
This dagger was bougie. Now, this was no ordinary dagger. It could have been like a favorite of Tut's, as it was like right on top of him, or maybe there was like some tea behind it that I was like, put it there. I don't know. But what archaeologists have found is that this dagger is out of this world, like legit.
Dang.
So after examining and testing the dagger for what it was made out of, they have found some very interesting information. Now, the top of the dagger had a beautiful clear stone on top of it that gave it like a crystallized look. And then it had like a layer of gold and I think wrapping around it. And then the hilt of it that you slide it in was all covered in like gold.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was bougie. But that's not what makes it unique. Like it's gorgeous. The blade is gorgeous, but it's what the blade is made out of. So after testing, archaeologists found that it was in fact made of iron, which was super rare to find in Egypt in the first place. So they're like, where the fuck did they find this? But the iron that it was made out of was not a component of Earth.
What?
Yeah. This means that the dagger was made from a meteorite that crash landed somewhere in Egypt like millions of years ago, and they dug and melted it up.
The fuck?
And created the blade out of it. This thing is priceless because it was made from a meteorite.
What?
Yeah.
What? I didn't think the story could get crazier.
Yeah, so this was his dagger. And of course, they probably didn't know that. They probably just were like, well, this is an interesting, like component. Let's like melt it and make a blade out of it.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. But due to Tut's early death, it has been noted through the shoving of objects in his tomb and objects that were not made for him that the job of his tomb was completely rushed. Like people were just shoving stuff in there and just like, that's why like none of the chariots were put together. Like they were kind of just like deassembled, like kind of just off to the side. And just like things were kind of like stacked on top of each other.
No one was expecting him to die at an early age?
Nope. No, they did not. But the item that has been rumored above all of just like curiosity was his own death mask.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So his death mask is made of solid gold, which has left many researchers to believe that it couldn't have been completed within the 7-day mark of Tut to get married or buried. Mm-hmm. So they had like 70 days to get this all done.
70 or 7?
70.
Okay.
Yeah. Because if he was far away, they would have to bring him back.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then in that meantime, they would have to get everything painted on the walls and then everything put into the tomb. Yeah. And then his sarcophaguses were too big for the shrines, or from like the big box with like the lid on it. It was his sarcophaguses were too big.
Oh.
And so they're like, okay, maybe that is like another reason of like, maybe this was actually for a queen.
Yeah,
and
it
not.
has to be. I'm convinced.
So.
Even just being to the right, I feel like that's enough proof.
Yeah. So.
But who knows? I mean, he died fast.
Yeah. So after they believed that Tut's mask was also not for him, they believed it was for another god or another pharaoh at one point. And so they actually did analyzing of the mask and its workmanship. And it actually has been confirmed that it was his. Now, they believe that it could have been taken from like different pieces of mask, and because of the coloration of it is kind of different in some areas. And they're like, it's probably just how the temperature was for it.
Yeah.
So from its workmanship and stuff, they have declared that it was in fact made for him and that it was done in that 70-day period.
Dang, okay.
Yeah, they probably worked around the clock to get this done.
Yeah.
So it's examinations like this on all the artifacts in Egypt that are found that we can better understand the culture. Now, Tutankhamun's life was cut short before we could see the true power he could have ruled over Egypt. But he was brought into his reign at the age of 9 with the responsibility of a failing country that his father caused in the first place. Mm-hmm. And him being removed from the king's list was what I believe as a harsh way of trying to do something right. But it was those who reigned after him that made the rules to decide to remove him from the king's list because they didn't believe that he actually did anything. Mm-hmm. And that he wasn't a true pharaoh, but he was. So without Howard Carter's determination to discover this unknown pharaoh, he in turn has made him, if not the most pharaoh of them all, the most popular. Not in what was accomplished in life, but with the awe of what glamorous and sad in learning of the power of Egypt and the new kingdom. So Tutankhamun was not as influential as, let's say, Cleopatra or Ramses or any of the other big name pharaohs. But because we have this proof of him and the grave goods that they put in those tombs, is that he is probably the top of the list of not of what he did in his reign, but what he provided us to know more about.
That makes so much
his
sense.
Culture.
Okay.
So that is Tutankhamun.
Because I feel like everyone knows King Tut. Like,
they do.
Everyone knows
one
that.
way or another. You may not know the full length of his story. You may just know the rumors or just him being the boy king. But they're finding so much more about him every day, every season.
That's so cool.
That they do. And I think they'll keep finding more about him eventually. And maybe they'll find more of his lineage.
Yeah, I hope so.
So.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. That was
such a mystery.
Big mystery. I freaking love it.
I love that. That's awesome.
Like, it's starting to get solved, which is nice because I hate unsolved mysteries.
Hopefully, by the time you die, it will be solved.
Literally. Alrighty. Where can you find us?
You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Historia the Podcast. You can also email us at historiathepodcast@gmail.com.
Yay.
Well, this has been a great 2 weeks. Again, if you have not listened to part 1, you can do that now, actually, because it kind of works both ways. You can listen to whichever one first.
Yep.
But that will give you the whole story of finding his tomb and everything. So definitely check that out. And stay tuned for next week. We'll do a little spooky spook.
Yay.
Woo!
Spooky season.
All right. We'll talk to you then.
Bye.
Bye.